Hello, I'm Sarah Barth, Executive Director of Sempervirens Fund. Welcome to another in our Under the Redwoods webinar series, in which we explore all things related to redwoods, ranging from the ecology and science of them to the art and poetry that they've inspired, to some of the role that they've played in history, you name it, all things redwood. I want to thank Sharp Investments, who continues to be our sponsor of this wonderful Under the Redwoods webinar series. We greatly appreciate their support. So that said, let's turn to our speaker for today. We are going to be joined by my colleague, Rachel Dann, who is Sempervirens, to my knowledge, our first ever Director of Government Relations. She comes with an incredible background, literally decades of experience working for various members of Congress in our region, most recently Congressman Jimmy Panetta, but prior to that, legendary conservationist Congressman Sam Farr. She's also worked for a number of years for various members of the Board of Supervisors in Santa Cruz County, including the current sitting supervisor, Dustin Cummings, as well as two of his predecessors, Ryan Coonerty and Ryan Coonerty's father. So she has a depth of knowledge and experience that Sempervirens has been able to draw upon. And thank goodness she has come on to the team, because we are getting more and more involved in policy efforts as we see those as the way and the place that Sempervirens can realize its long-term vision for healthy, resilient redwood forests. And there couldn't be a more immediate need for her than what's going on at the federal level with some of the discussions that are occurring both in Congress and coming out of the White House with regard to rolling back bedrock environmental protections, with regard to selling off public lands, and a whole host of things that will affect many landscapes in this country, but certainly will have detrimental effects on our region and our redwoods if they're allowed to go forward. So with that, it just happens to be very exciting. Exciting is the wrong word. Very key moment in the public policy arena at the federal level. And there are similarly important discussions happening at the state level in terms of public policy. Those have been much more positive and less about rolling back things and more about strengthening protections, strengthening funding to allow conservation to happen in our beautiful state. So for all of those reasons, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, Rachel Dann.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with everyone here for my second Under the Redwoods presentation. So let me see, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started here. All righty. So again, I'm Rachel Dann. Pleasure to be here with you all. We are going to be talking about policy today, one of my favorite things in the world to talk about. What we will cover in this discussion. So if you were with me last year, we went over some of the campaigns that we Sempervirens supported in the last election cycle. So one of the things we're going to do in this discussion is I'm going to give you an update on what played out last year. But the main part of this discussion is going to be what's changed under the new administration for conservation. So the conservation landscape under the new administration. I need to caveat this discussion. As you might imagine, this is a moving target. And as I tried to make this presentation as up to date as I possibly can, but even just this morning, there have been some changes in the big domestic policy bill that we're going to be discussing today. And so just know that this is a moving target. In addition, I'm going to focus most of the conversation, like I said, on the big, beautiful bill and the conservation elements in that bill. But that's not to say that we know that there are other issues going on that affect conservation at the federal level right now. And There's federal legislation, separate federal legislation that affects conservation. As you might have read last night, Agricultural Secretary Rollins issued a directive to change a major Clinton policy and the no roads in the Federal Forest Service policy that he put into place 25 years ago. She has put forward a directive to eliminate that. We are tracking all of those issues, but today we're going to focus on the big domestic policy bill and the conservation elements in there, because that is what's moving through Congress right now. And then we're going to talk about what we all can do together to participate in this process, and then we'll end with a Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, just keep them handy, and we'll try to get to those at the end of the conversation. A little bit about me. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this because Sarah gave me such a kind introduction. I'm a native Californian, grew up in San Francisco, and I've been in Santa Cruz County for the last 30 years or so. And I love it here and love working in the redwood forest. So what has happened since our last conversation? Quite a bit. So we're going to get into Prop 4, Santa Cruz County's Measure Q, and then the Assembly bill that we have been pushing through the state to facilitate land transfers. And then we're going to move on to the new administration. So Prop 4 was on the ballot last November. If you remember our conversation from last year, we talked about that. This was a conservation bond that was on the statewide ballot. So it passed by 60%. Thank you to everyone who supported this measure, who voted for it. This is really, really consequential for the state of California and conservation, because what this does for our work specifically is it makes public dollars available to help us do the work that we do to protect redwood forests. So just to draw the line for you, for instance, we have properties that we're looking at acquiring to conserve. And those, some of those properties are big, some of them are small, but for the large ones, we're talking about, costs that are, well into the millions of dollars. Now that we have some funding at the state level, what we can do is apply for grants to help offset some of those costs for us. And so that's what we're going to be doing. Thanks to you, thanks to the voters of the state of California for making those dollars available for us and conservation organizations across the state of California. So there was something interesting I want to talk about just for a second with Prop 4. And this map illustrates this. This is Prop 4, how it did by county throughout California. As you can see, the blue is where it passed. The tan and dark tan is where it didn't pass, where it got below 50%. So as you see, just from taking a cursory look at this map, it's mostly blue. What's significant from my perspective is that Prop 4 overperformed in counties. It overperformed Kamala Harris in many counties. It also performed very well in what you might consider to be red counties. So, so like for example, Fresno County, I guess it's kind of a purple county now, but Prop 4 passed. It also won in counties where President Trump won. So this is all to say that conservation is really a bipartisan, it's a bipartisan issue. And we're going to come back to this point later in the presentation. Another campaign that we supported was Measure Q. And this was a local conservation ballot measure in Santa Cruz County. It was led by the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County. Our organization and our partners at Peninsula Open Space Trust also worked on this measure. This measure generates $7.5 million for conservation projects in Santa Cruz County, and that also passed with 60%, just over 60% of the vote. This measure also provides direct funding to a property that we co-own with Peninsula Open Space Trust. to deliver on resiliency projects for that property that benefit the entire community. And so we're really grateful that the voters also said yes to Measure Q. So it's very gratifying for us. So thank you to everyone who voted for that and for all the work that was put into passing this measure. The last update I want to provide is about the Assembly bill that is being carried on our behalf by Assemblymember Pellerin. If you remember our discussion from last year, Assemblymember Pellerin has carried a bill for us to facilitate land transfers, so property that we acquire to conserve and that we want to transfer then to state parks to grow the park system. And so this is a cutting the green tape bill to facilitate these transfers. So we got this bill all the way down to the 1 yard line. But unfortunately, it was vetoed by the governor. We ran into a little snafu with the administration that we were unable to work out, and the bill was vetoed. However, we were encouraged, and the Assembly member was encouraged to reauthor the bill and try again in this legislative session. And so Assemblymember Pellerin agreed to do that. So our bill is making its way through the legislative process again. And what is new this year is that the administration clearly has taken notice of this bill and the necessity of this bill, and they have actually authored their own piece of policy and their own piece of legislation that seeks to do something very similar that our bill is trying to do, but make it statewide. And so we are really gratified by that and excited that our legislation, that Assemblymember Pellerin's legislation, has inspired the administration to take a hard look at their transfer process. And so we look forward to supporting both of those efforts as they make it through the legislative process. And I have to also give a shout out to our partner, Assemblymember Gail Pellerin, who has been a stalwart ally of ours and to the conservation community, and to just thank her for carrying this bill for us and being a real leader in conservation. And so now I want to turn to what is going on in the federal level, and the vibe shift, I guess, as folks are calling it. So when we talk about what has happened in a year, a lot has happened. So as wonderful as it was to pass Prop 4 and Measure Q, we also voted in a new administration last November. And with the new administration comes new policies. So I'll tell you that I really didn't pay much attention to Project 2025 until the day after the election. And then I went ahead and read the BLM chapter of Project 2025. And I will have to say, so we got a little bit of a preview to what was coming. But as the slide says, no one really anticipated the scale or pace of the new policies coming forward. So in a sense, the new vibe can be described as, with regard to conservation at least, going from what was an ethos of protection to production. So instead of protecting and conserving our federal lands, we are now looking at what can we get out of our federal lands. And this is a real major shift in kind of the ethos and policy of the new administration. So let's talk about the big domestic policy bill that is moving through Congress. And we're focusing on this, like I said, because there are major conservation consequences in this bill. And it's what's moving through Congress right now. There are other pieces of legislation that also are conservation oriented and are consequential, could be consequential. But this is what's moving now. The president has directed Congress that he wants this done by July 4th, and they look to be on a schedule to possibly get this done. So you all probably know this already, but just in case, mostly this is a big tax cut bill. And to pay for those tax cuts, there need to be very stiff spending cuts. I would say that the natural resources section of this bill is seen as an opportunity to help generate some of that revenue to pay for those tax cuts that many folks are saying are mostly going towards the wealthy. Here is just a really quick and dirty breakdown of some of the conservation funding cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill, and that is the name of the bill. And so the big thing for conservation that we want to focus on is that in the One Big Beautiful Bill, there is provisions to mandate the selling of public land. This photo that you're looking at is a gorgeous view of the Chitoni Coast Areas National Monument, or a partial view of it. It's 5,000 acres, so this is just a snapshot of it. As Sarah mentioned in her introduction, this organization was the pointy end of the spear to get this land designated as a national monument. Sempervirens ran that campaign. If it were not for this organization, I think it is safe to say that Chitoni Coast Areas would not be a national monument. And it's turned out to be quite consequential that it is a national monument, because there are a host of federal lands that are on the chopping block to be sold off to the highest bidder for energy extraction and other uses. National monuments have not been part of that conversation. And so that's hugely consequential. And so at least for our little national monument here in Santa Cruz County, we can feel confident that at least right now, it's not on the chopping block. Let me get a glass of water. So you might be thinking, there might be somebody out there thinking, and this is a good question, doesn't the federal government already lease public land for energy extraction? And what's so different about this bill? Well, I'll tell you. The main thing that distinguishes the One Big Beautiful Bill and accompanying legislation from past efforts is the scale and the requirement to do so. So not only is there more land being proposed to be sold than ever before, it's mandated. It's required, and there's an attached shot clock to the disposition of the federal lands being proposed to be sold. So whereas in the past, or currently, the BLM regularly leases land for energy extraction, for cattle grazing, for even wind and solar, and that could be seen, as a win-win. But what's different, what's being proposed right now that makes it different is the mandatory nature of it, and the fact that there are these shot clocks that require a certain amount being sold every few months. I think it's like a 30 or 60-day timeline. And so this map shows you the Western states where these lands are proposed to be sold. And now there is actually, so in addition to what the previous slide I just showed you, there is another accompanying piece of legislation that has come out of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. So what happens in Congress is, if you have followed this, there was a House version of the One Big Beautiful Bill, and that passed the House. and then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate looks at that, what passed in the House, and they can say, okay, great, we'll take this and go with it. Or what happens most of the time is they say, okay, great, thank you very much, and now we're going to work on our version of what you just gave us. And so this is what happened in the Senate. And so the Senate Republicans in the Natural Resources Committee went to work on the natural resources section of this bill, and they added an entirely new section. What I need to tell you right now is this is what is a moving target. This provision in here, which grows the amount of land proposed to be sold. I don't know how to do the math, but 2 to 3 million acres to 250 million acres plus. That's an incredible increase in the amount of land that is proposed to be sold. And this is what's a moving target. We just read this morning that this might not happen. So this is a scary slide. And the map that I'm going to show you here shows you how scary this could be. The Bureau of Land Management is in orange. The green is U.S. Forest Service land. And under this Senate Natural Resources bill, these would be lands that would be eligible and required to be sold under this policy. We just read this morning, possibly the U.S. Forest Service lands are going to be taken off the table. That's what Representative Mike Lee has said this morning, and that the BLM lands would be scaled back significantly. Maybe that will change, maybe it won't. But what is being proposed currently is significant. This is a slide with just the acreage numbers. What I wanted to point out with this slide is that if you were really closely paying attention to the slide that showed which states had land to be sold off in the One Big Beautiful Bill, you might notice that there's a state missing, and that's the state of Montana. So when the Senate went to work to develop this this package, they didn't include the state of Montana because of what had happened in the House. So in the House, there was also a provision to do large-scale public land sell-off. And that was fought vociferously by Representative Ryan Zinke. I think there were a couple 100,000 acres of land in the state of Montana that was proposed to be sold. And Representative Zinke objected. He objected fiercely, and he was able to get together a group of conservationists, hunters, anglers, and they successfully were able to strip that provision out of the House bill. So then when it got to the Senate, it did not have that provision in it. So when the Senate committee went to work to draft this legislation, they just decided to take Montana out of it so that they didn't have to deal with Representative Zinke. And that was probably a good idea. So this is, obviously, I don't have to tell this group what the consequences of a mass sell-off of public land would be. Loss of habitat, loss of public access, and just when you bifurcate conservation areas, it's really difficult to restore the ecological value, if ever. And then also, of course, this land is public land. And when lands belong to the public, there's an assumption that they are conserved forever. And when we have a government that, changes course on this, in my opinion, it tends to start to erode trust in our federal government and in our institutions. And like I said on the slide, it starts to challenge public trust. So now I'm going to bring the conversation back to what we can do. and kind of connect this conversation back to the Prop 4 slide that I was showing you earlier. And that is to say that there is hope. There is hope because conservation, as you all know, is broadly supported and is bipartisan. The Trust for Public Land recently put out a report making this case that conservation is broadly supported and across the political spectrum. And from that report, they cited a number of polls and data to make this case. One of their polls is what I put up here on the slide, which it's a poll from Colorado College back in January of this year. That shows that folks value our federal lands and are opposed to those conservation cuts. In addition, the Trust for Public Land conducted their own survey and found similar findings. They also, in this report, included data from their over 30 years of supporting ballot measures all over the country in red states and blue states, and to demonstrate that in those ballot measures where they supported passed in red states and in blue states. And then in last year, Trust for Public Land supported 23 measures, including our Measure Q that we supported as well, and every single one of those measures passed. So that is to say that conservation, as the graphic illustrates, is really a bridge between Democrats and Republicans. And advocacy matters. I think really the lesson of this Congress and what happened when the big beautiful bill was in the House demonstrates that advocacy matters and it can work. It's possible that, I don't want to be too optimistic about the news we heard this morning about possibly drastically reducing the amount of public land that will be for sale in the Senate version. But I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case, because I think that, Republican senators in Western states, they know that their local communities surrounded by public land rely on that for their own economic development. If you have a small town and they rely on tourism from public lands, or business owners who have a mountaineering store or a kayak rental, or say you take folks out on fishing trips, that could be a real effect to a local economy when you take away their public land and privatize it. So this is only to say that if that mass sell-off, which is proposed in the Senate version, gets scaled back, I won't be surprised. But I don't want to make you think that that we still don't have to do anything, because I think that we should still behave as if this mass sell-off is on the table. So what can we do? Well, we can call our senators. I put our numbers up for our two California senators, Senator Schiff and Senator Padilla. I can tell you that they are not in favor of a mass sell-off of our public lands, but they still need to hear from us. If you happen to live outside of California, you can call the Maine Capitol switchboard and get the phone number for any member of Congress, either in the House or the Senate. So if you have a cousin that lives, in Idaho, you can call the Maine Capitol switchboard and get that number for your cousin and ask your cousin to call and protect our public lands. And what are we doing at Sempervirens? We are working closely with our national organizations and coalitions. Our executive director, Sarah Barth, has a long and deep history on Capitol Hill. She worked on Capitol Hill for many years, and so between the two of us, we have our ear to the ground on these issues. And we also look to our national partner organizations for guidance, and we support them where necessary. We also are sending our advocacy and our action alerts to you, our supporters, so that you know where you can, where and when is the best time to get involved. And then also I'm communicating regularly with our members of Congress, our state legislators, and our local representatives. But the one thing I wanted to end with was that no matter what happens at the federal level or even at the state level, we will continue our core work and our mission to protect and preserve the redwood forests of the Santa Cruz Mountains with your help. So let's see, here are some of the resources I wanted to make available to you that I looked to in this presentation. The TPL report is excellent. If you just Google America Needs More Public Lands, it'll pop up, and it makes a great case with data showing how bipartisan and broadly supported conservation is across the board. The Wilderness Society has an excellent interactive map that, let's see if it's updated. If we have a new policy direction, possibly they'll update it and it won't look quite as scary as the map that I showed you about public lands for sale. And then I also put up here the Conservation Lands Foundation. They're an organization that supports our national monuments, and they also are doing excellent work at the national level, keeping us informed, keeping me informed. And so they're just also a great resource. And then lastly, if you have any questions about any of this or want to talk further, I know I went through some of this very quickly, and policy can be really wonky and detailed when you get into the weeds. And I really kind of gave an overview of a lot of these issues. But if you want to talk further, feel free to shoot me an email. I will do my best to make time to have that conversation with you. So with that, that is the end of the PowerPoint part of the presentation, and I really look forward to answering your questions and continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Rachel. You know, I want to just start with a macro level question. You really focused in your presentation on the public land sell-off. But as you know, and I think this audience probably knows or has heard either from us or others, there are a slew of other problematic ideas being floated, either coming out of the White House directly in the form of various executive orders, as well as ideas being floated in the U.S. Congress around removal or dramatic weakening of protections for endangered species habitat, proposals to de-designate or severely modify a number of individual national monuments, thankfully not the one that we work on, but others, including the two newest ones that were designated under President Joe Biden in Southern California and Southern and Northern California. And the sort of onslaught of environmental rollbacks being proposed can be really overwhelming and I think disheartening for people. And I've seen some folks just start to shut down because it feels like too much to deal with. And so obviously one way to handle it is to turn to organizations like ours and see what we're focused on and where individuals can plug in. But I just wanted to give you a chance to comment to this audience about how likely you think it is that this suite of terrible things are going to actually be realized either legislatively or in the regulatory process. Just give some perspective on that would be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And I think that it's incredibly overwhelming. I found it overwhelming, frankly, even just preparing for this talk, because there are so many things we could have focused on. And of all of those things you mentioned, Endangered Species Act rollbacks, National Monument rollbacks could be one whole conversation. So I think with the national monuments, we did see a pushback. There was an executive order that came back, and immediately CLF, that's the Conservation Lands Foundation, put out an alert and activated their partners and their members. We joined that effort and pushed back on that. And we haven't seen, well, I mean, I don't want to knock on wood, but we haven't seen anything substantive yet, really trying to take away those protections. So I think it's hard to say for sure, but like this mass sell-off that was proposed, that it looks like it's going to be walked back significantly. I have some hope, especially for the I have hope for the conservation elements, because the community, all of our supporters and around the country are so engaged and know to push back. So I have to give credit to just the boots on the ground doing the advocacy work.
Yeah, I think one thing I remind myself of is it's one thing to talk big about all the changes you're going to make for a government official to do it. But our system, thanks to our founders, this country's founders, makes it pretty hard to move major policy. And we have a very gridlocked Congress right now because of the partisan divide. And so really sweeping changes can be hard to be realized. And so I have, and I think we organizationally have tried really hard to focus on those things that we think are real and where real rollbacks could happen versus those things that are just sort of chest thumping and dog whistles for the extractive community that wants to see change happen, but for which there may not be a policy mechanism for them to realize those goals. And I say that in part because I hope this audience can try not to get overwhelmed, recognize that in this context, there are lots of ways these things, these bad policies can get bollocksed up, and that raising your voice and engaging really does make a difference. And we've seen with this administration on a number of things when there's a sudden hue and cry or pushback on a wide variety of things that they often quickly give up and retrench. And so I think it's important for the conservation voices to be loud and aggressive as these measures start to be rolled out, because the harder we push back now, I think the less likely it is we'll see more of these terrible measures in the future. So early pushback right now on some of these things, like the sell-off of public lands, may be not only beneficial for this particular bad idea, but it may help us stave off additional bad ideas. So I just want this audience, of all audiences, not to give up hope. I actually feel, although it's depressing to see what's being proposed, I'm cautiously optimistic that a lot of what's being proposed will go nowhere real. Do you agree with that, or?
I do agree with that. I guess I do agree with that. And I think that is the right way to phrase it. But that's not to say that we don't, but they will go away because we are going to make noise about it. So we have to, so the burden is still on us and the boots on the ground to pick up the phone and call your senators and your member of Congress, because this bill will have to go back to the House and get voted on there too. But yeah, I do, and I think that's a testament to the active nature of the conservation community, and the fact that should some of these policies make it to the president's desk and get signed, we know that some of them will be challenged in court, those that that folks feel violate the law. So that's our other that's like the last last line of defense there, and we don't want to get there. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think I have hope as well.
Yeah, not to be Pollyannish. There's no question we're in a really dark time for conservation interests at the national level. The other thing I wanted to just draw out and maybe ask you to say a little more on, or just to underscore it myself, is yes, the 2 US senators from California, many of the Congress people from California are already environmentally friendly, if not environmental champions. However, they are getting pushed to weigh in on 1,000 different issues right now. Think of all the things that they must face on a daily basis, ranging from immigration issues to war with Iran to all kinds of things that have nothing to do with conservation. And it is helpful for them to gauge how hard to push on conservation or how much to prioritize conservation if they hear from their constituents, because their time is limited and they have to make their choices about what they put their energies into. And the more they hear the support for conservation and the request that they defend our conservation laws and rules and regulations here in our public lands, the more likely they are to have that remain high on their priority list.
Yes,
so I think
exactly.
it is important for people to call their offices, even if you think our 2 senators are already locked down on this issue, which they probably are, but to help them see how strongly their electorate feels about this is really important.
I would put 3 exclamation points on that statement. That's exactly right. And then just to highlight what you said is that if they know how many folks are really care about this, they'll spend more time on the issue. So it really, just because they're with us on this, and shoot them an email, call, whatever. It's never been more easy to contact your senators and let them know that conservation is important to you.
Yeah. The other question, just to pivot a little bit from the gloom and doom of what we're seeing happening nationally, and it is gloom and doom. Here in California, I think we, for the most part, continue to see our assembly and state senate and our governor be champions in general of environmental protection. And I'm curious what you think the role of the state of California and our various leaders will be, or what the consequences will be in fending off some of the changes that are being proposed at the national level.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up, because the other evening I was listening to a presentation by someone at the state level in parks, and they were talking about the proposed mass sell-off, and with great concern. And the context was that parks might be interested, should some of these federal lands come up for sale. Let's say, for instance, around Lake Tahoe, the state of California might be interested in buying them to protect them. But what this person was telling our group was that from the language of the proposed legislation, she wasn't even sure if the state would be eligible to purchase, because the way that the legislation was written gave enormous discretion to the Secretary of the Interior, who could decide, actually, no, we're selling these lands for production, not for protection. And so no, state of California, you're not eligible to buy them. So I think that clearly the state of California wants to be involved to help be that, bulwark against what's happening. But it's unclear, at least in this legislation, in this particular case, whether they would be successful. In other areas, I think I have more confidence. State-owned land is state-owned land. I feel that that's really pretty protected from some of these federal intrusions. But I think there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I would say for this audience, it's important to understand a lot of states, and California is in this category, have their own environmental, bedrock environmental laws, clean air, clean water, endangered species protection at the state level. And so I think about the state laws that are in place, if the federal laws are removed and California is without them, that at least we will have those as sort of a backstop. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, but I do go to sleep at night knowing that I don't see those laws changing anytime soon. That's not true across the country. So other states that don't have those environmental laws will not be in the same place. I see that our state attorney general is out there filing litigation, and I imagine will continue to do so. And we may at some point be asking for advocacy directed at the state attorney general to file litigation in which the state has an interest in how federal laws are playing out, and could be a plaintiff in litigation to try to protect some of the existing bedrock federal environmental laws. I imagine that is something they will do. But importantly, I think if the federal lands in California get sold off, if the national monuments in California are weakened, if all the funding for the National Park Service is so diminished that people can't visit those public lands, all of that is going to likely have spillover effects on our state public lands. And I believe state parks in California is worried about a dramatic increase in visitation if a lot of federal lands become closed to the public, either because they've been sold or because there's no staff there to work there. And so those are the kinds of impacts that I'm not sure folks in this audience may be aware of, but that I know you are thinking about.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So, well, just on a more positive note, I'm sure people are wondering if, because Sempervirens is always trying to get its lands turned into state parks or other kinds of protected conservation lands, what can we do, or how should we be thinking about how to ensure that those lands really are protected, and to learn from what's happening now to mitigate for future changes in administration, either nationally or at the state level, so that lands we thought were protected remain protected, public lands.
Well, I think that I would look to the expertise, to our legal expertise, to really button this up, but we might want to think in the future about, adding more deed restrictions to our properties. Just to this, I'd have to say, like, even just a year and a half ago, thinking about what we might have to do to add further layers of protection to what, from my perspective, our land's already protected, would have been kind of unthinkable, but it's not right anymore. And so I do think that maybe is the challenge for the next year or two for the land trust community, including our organization, is to really think through how we can build in those protections when we do make an acquisition and transfer that to state parks.
Yeah, well, that, and I'm seeing the fact that the Trump administration has only been willing to take on a few national monuments and that the public land sell-off excluded national monuments, to me is also a lesson for the conservation community, that the greater the level of protection for public lands and the greater visibility they have. So, for example, Chitoni Coast Dairies National Monument, not only did it get the imprimatur of President Obama when it was designated, but it got a lot of attention in the press and a lot of visibility. It's going to get a lot of visibility when it's open and people see that it's this special federal place. And I think that kind of visibility and those additional layers of protection make it harder to just roll back when other areas are vulnerable. And so I feel like that is one of the other takeaways for our organization and sister organizations is, how do we make sure that the public is paying attention to these landscapes and cares enough about them that if they are under threat, that the decision makers know there will be blowback, and so they don't even try it. Right. I feel like those are some of the questions or lessons, perhaps. Well, let's take it to the audience and see from our colleague Matt if he has some questions that the audience wanted to raise, because I could ask you questions nonstop, but that's not what we want to do here.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Rachel, for this great presentation and conversation, Sarah. I attempted to answer a question in the chat, but I wanted to confirm. There is in AB 2103 streamlining of the process to transfer lands to the state of California. Could you say just a little bit more about exactly what is being streamlined?
Yeah, for sure. The bill basically, so currently the process to get property transferred to state parks is it has to go through a bunch of hoops. But one of the hoops that takes the longest is a board called the Public Works Board. And so what this bill seeks to do is to eliminate the Public Works Board from the process to transfer land. It still has to go through a bunch of other due diligence and has a bunch of different departments, has their eyes on it. But it's really a simple bill because it just removes the Public Works Board from the process. Similarly, so that our land transfers to state parks would work in a similar fashion that other state departments who transfer land go through. So we're just mirroring the process that other departments like Department of Fish and Game go through to transfer property.
Great, thank you very much. I wanted to switch gears to a bill called the Fix Our Forests Act. And Rachel, I know you have said that this one is a little bit more difficult to parse. Among the things it does is increases the size of areas that would be exempted from environmental review, but it does other things too. Has Sempervirens Fund taken a position on this bill, and what are we doing about it?
We have not taken an official position on this standalone bill. There are conservation folks that on conservation organizations that have endorsed this bill, and there are conservation organizations that have not endorsed this bill. Our congressional delegation in California overwhelmingly supported this bill. But we officially have not taken a position there. We do support a proposed amendment to that may be attached to the Fix Our Forest Act. It has not been attached yet, but it's an amendment that would allow land trusts to hold conservation easements. It's a bill that Representative Garamendi has been trying to get through for many, many years. That would really provide a great tool for organizations like Sempervirens to be able to offer to willing sellers who want to sell us their property. So we are tracking the Fix Our Forest Act, but we have not officially weighed in on that piece of legislation.
Great, thank you. I know we're running out of time, and I'm hesitant to bring up a challenging one, but we did get a couple questions about the Federal Endangered Species Act, and there are some distinctions between it and California's version. How would removing the harm provisions from the federal act affect conservation work on the local level?
I have to say, honestly, I haven't looked into this deeply enough to be able to answer that on the local level specifically. So I cannot tell you how it's going to affect our work on the local level. I have read about that proposal, and I do think it would be quite consequential, potentially, and harmful. But honestly, I can't answer that. I don't know. I can't answer that without having looked into it more deeply. I wouldn't want to give information that's inaccurate. But if whoever asked that question wants to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to have that conversation offline when I've had more time to really look into it and more deeply.
Okay, Matt, I'm going to assume that's our last question. Thank you, Rachel. We really enjoyed hearing from you, and it's been a pleasure to have you on the team. And it's good timing that we have you on the team. To our audience, thank you for joining us. This webinar will be available on our website within the next day or two. You can check it out at sempervirens.org/under/the-redwoods. And we hope you will join us in July for our next in the webinar series. We will be joined by Dr. Michael Jones, who is a researcher at the University of California and who is going to update us on the world of research involving redwoods. So taking us beyond the last webinar's discussion that we had with Dr. Zane Moore. And thank you again to Scharf Investments for sponsoring this wonderful series. And we will see you all soon under the redwoods next month. Thanks again, Rachel.
Thank you. Bye.